All right, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? Look at the chat. Can I be heard? Can I be heard? All right. Yeah. I'm sorry guys about that. I'm just I need a producer. But anyway, starting from the top, I'm going to start with the picks right off the bat. So, last week 4-1 against the spread, 3 moneyline wins. 3 moneyline wins, can't complain. Big one being New Mexico beating Wyoming 17-16. So that put me back into profitable territory for the season. I said before the season started, I'd be very surprised if I could have a profitable year, but I'm in good shape. Still got 2 regular season weeks to go and then the bowls. So not out of the woods yet, but I'm surprised. I thought this was just going to be a throwaway year and my run of profitable seasons would end. So I'm not going to go through the recap again of the betting file. Actually, I will. Let me pull it up. But yeah, I really apologize for I had to do this all over again. So yeah, last week was a good week. Let me pull up the betting file so I can show I'll show the keys. I won't show anything else. So the keys this week are going to be, this is the Moneyline Keys. So this is nickel quarter, nickel greater than 25.5%. And on the season, that key set is 8 winning weeks out of 9, plus 10 units last week overall, plus 23 units. So hopefully that continues to roll. And then the spread keys, it's going to be ATM greater than 0, penny greater than 19, and then quarter greater than 0. And that key set on the year, not as well as the money lines. I want to say it's plus 11 units, with half of it being from last week. Am I correct? Plus 11.2 units and plus 5.9 last week. So the idea, that's how my model's always been. It's always been money line bets, do well, and then hopefully you can just tread water on spread bets. So those are the keys this week. And then coming back here, the plays for this week. North Texas. I had to fill this in again. Whoops. I already have it filled in. My bad. North Texas. I don't know who they're playing. I'm guessing they're playing UTEP because if North Texas is favored against anybody by 10, the team they're playing, yeah, it's UTEP. The team must be pretty bad because North Texas is not too far away from where I'm at right now, and they are not good. Utah, I think they're playing Colorado. Memphis is playing Houston. Baylor's playing Oklahoma State. Appalachian State, I forgot who they're playing. Central Michigan is playing Toledo. And Virginia Tech is playing Virginia. I was very surprised. I talked about this in the silent stream. Let me just make sure you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me? All right, good. All right, I talked about this in the silent stream, but I was very surprised to see Central Michigan that big of a dog to Toledo, so that's why I went on to ESPN and checked what the spread was, because I didn't believe it, but it is. Pittsburgh's playing tonight against Georgia Tech. Nevada is playing San Jose State. That's going to be a pretty good matchup this week. It'll probably decide the Mountain West Division. Wake Forest, I think they're playing Louisville. Western Michigan is playing somebody. Central Michigan, Toledo. North Carolina is playing Miami, Florida. Army, Navy, and Washington State is playing Cal. So those are the plays for this week. 8 money line, 7 spread. Hopefully things can, not be too bad to unravel the progress we made last week, but we'll see. So those are the plays for this week. So now I can go back and talk about what I was talking about when the stream went silent, or when the stream was silent, and that is I want to talk about the playoff, college football playoff, and why I am concerned that we might see 2 of both semifinal matches of the college football playoff being rematches. There's a good chance we could see a college football playoff semifinal of Alabama versus Texas A&M and Clemson versus Notre Dame. Alabama, Texas A&M already played back in September. Alabama won by 24, I think. And then Clemson, Notre Dame, if they were to play in the college football playoff, would be the 3rd time they'd play this year. Absolutely ridiculous. The college football playoff is stupid. It's too small, too arbitrary. Now, I can get why you might want to have Texas A&M and Alabama play again, because Alabama and Texas A&M, they played on Alabama's home field, even though home advantage isn't that big of a deal this year. They get to play on a neutral field. I get that. But Clemson, Notre Dame, they would have just played on a neutral field Do we need to see it for a third time? And that's the problem with the college football playoff. It's too arbitrary. And for that to happen, Ohio State would have to be blackballed. And I don't think Ohio State is they're a top 4 team, guys. And this is what I was saying when the microphone was silent. Ohio State's a top 4 team. And stop hating on Ohio State. It's not their fault. None of this is their fault. If you want to hate on somebody, hate the Big Ten for making such a cluster of a situation of the Big Ten football this year. Hate on the Big Ten. Hate on the NCAA and college football playoff for having such a stupid postseason format that's so arbitrary and too exclusive. Don't hate on Ohio State. It's not their fault. They are a top 4 team. Whether they play 3 games or 30 games, they are a top 4 team, and that's just how it is. Direct the hate elsewhere. And that's the thing with Texas A&M. I was talking about them too, and the microphone was silent. Texas A&M, I don't think they're a top 4 team. I'm not hating on them. Even though most of my friends from high school did end up going to Texas A&M. I'm not hating on them. I like their style. I like the way they play football. They don't win pretty. They do not win pretty, and the metrics don't like them. They're not a top 10 team in pretty much all the advanced metrics out there. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the SEC not playing non-conference games has really hurt them from a metric standpoint. Because usually the SEC uses their non-conference performance to boost their profiles in the metrics. Without that, the value of an SEC win is not, it does not inflate their metric. I'm not saying inflate, it does not boost their metrics. I don't think Texas A&M's a top 4 team. I've watched a lot of their games. They don't win pretty, but I do like the style. I wish more teams were like them. You don't know why Texas A&M's in the position they're in right now? 2 reasons: offensive line and defense. Their offensive line is why they beat Auburn. Now, they did not win that game pretty, and they got lucky. Auburn was up 20-14, and they had a bad call go against them. That kind of flipped the momentum. Texas A&M gets the ball back. They're driving, but they have a 3rd and 18. Kellen Mond, Texas A&M quarterback, throws a pass right into the breadbasket of the Auburn defensive back. Couldn't ask for an easier interception. What does it do? Ball goes right through his butterfingers. Not only did that happen, that was bad enough. But not only did that happen, but the ball went straight to the arms of a Texas A&M receiver standing in the end zone. For a touchdown, Texas A&M takes the lead, and Auburn unraveled from there. That was lucky. But sometimes it's good. It's better to be lucky than good, I agree. But that was lucky. And then Texas A&M still had to put the game away. It was just a 1-point lead. But their defense clamped down, and their offensive line grinded out the clock. Their offensive line is really good. It masks a lot of their problems. I don't think they have a good quarterback, but he looks good because the offensive line gives them a lot of time to throw. They don't have the best skill position players, but it doesn't matter. When you have a good offensive line and you can just pound the ball, have a good defense to fall back on, you don't really need to do a lot on offense. And I wish more teams are like that instead of this whole gimmick, up-tempo, spread the ball, gimmick offenses, which I've never been a fan of. I'm a big fan of teams that rely on offensive lines and defense to get it done. Now, I'm not a fan of A&M. I don't like them, in-state rival and everything, but I like their style. More teams should be like that instead of being gimmicky. But they're not a top 4 team. I don't think they're in the same class as Alabama. Obviously, they already got blown out by them. I don't think they're in the same class as Ohio State. There's been rumblings about A&M playing Ohio State. It's not going to happen. And I get why Jimbo Fisher won't want to play it, because they wouldn't win, first of all. And second of all, they have a better chance of getting into the playoff by just playing Tennessee, beating them, and letting the chips fall where they may than going into an almost certain losing situation against Ohio State. I don't think they're in the same class as Clemson, even though they played Clemson last year decently. I don't think they're in the same class as Clemson. And so then the other teams they're competing for the number 4 spot with. Notre Dame. I think they're probably the same team as Notre Dame. Similar teams. They don't win pretty, but they win. I would say Notre Dame's win over Clemson is about equal to beating Florida. A&M beat Florida at full strength. Notre Dame did not beat Clemson at full strength, but I think Clemson's a better team than Florida, so it's a wash. And then Florida, A&M already beat them, albeit by 3 on their home floor. I think on a neutral field, Florida would win that game. But I don't think any of the teams competing for that number 4 spot are in the same league as the other 3. And then you have a team like Cincinnati, who I don't think is in the same league as a team like Notre Dame or Texas A&M or Florida. I think Cincinnati will lose to all 3. And so that's kind of where we're at. Iowa State is not going to get to the playoff. I'm sorry, they're not. They're not. So that's not going to happen. The Big 12 champ is out. Pac-12. Has USC lost yet? Even if they don't, I don't know. I mean, it's such a wild card. But yeah, let's just assume the Pac-12 is out as well. But I don't think that 4 spot will ultimately matter in the end. They're just going to be fodder for Alabama. But I just think the whole playoff is stupid. It's too arbitrary, and this season is exemplifying that more than any other. The college football playoff has turned. When they instituted the playoff, remember what they said? It's not the top 4 resumes. It's not the top 4 team with the least number of losses. It's not the 4 best P5 champions. You know what they told us? It is the 4 best teams, and that's the whole reason they have a committee. Because if it was just top 4 resumes, which the playoff has morphed into, that's what it has been. Even though the college football playoff might not say that's what it is, that's what it's become, the top 4 resumes. If it was just going to be the top 4 resumes, why'd we ever get rid of the BCS? Just use the BCS rankings to rank the top 4 teams, because that's what the BCS kind of was. It was like a conglomeration of computer rankings, and you can come up with the 4 best resumes by doing that. But the whole point of the committee was so they could use their eye test and pick out who the 4 best teams might be regardless of resume. I have an issue with that as well, because that's just being gatekeepers at that point, because the eye test is always going to fall in favor of the blue bloods. Because there's been teams that were top 4 best teams and got left out. It's happened multiple years since the playoff came into effect. As well as teams that were clearly not the top 4 getting in because they had a top 4 resume. Washington, 2016, good example. Michigan State was not a top 4 team in 2015. They were not. So what I'm saying is that there needs to be a non-arbitrary way to get into the college football playoff. If you still want to have a committee and pick out at-large bids, that's fine. But there has to be a non-arbitrary way to get in. It needs to expand. It needs to have automatic bids. What exists right now is a joke. And if the playoff is 2 rematches, which it could happen if if the Big Ten isn't able to get Ohio State over the top, and I think the committee will pick an Ohio State if they're allowed to. But if we get 2 rematches, even then, I just think the playoff is a joke. It's a joke. It's a terrible postseason format, and I said it either last week or the week before. The reason it exists the way it exists is so that they only have to split the pie 4 ways. It's not about the amount of money. If they had a 16-team playoff with automatic bids, it would make money hand over fist. It would print money. It would make way more money than the college football playoff makes right now. But the reason they don't want to do that is because it would mean having to share. And that's the thing. The college football playoff is all about greed. It's all about greed. The less people they have to share with, the better. They would rather have a stupid format that makes no sense and is arbitrary with 4 teams, which means less sharing, than have a 16-team playoff and have to share. They don't want to share. That's what it's all about. That's why the college football playoff was instituted to begin with. Teams from outside the good old boy network and college football were getting too close to getting into the BCS title game. And the college football playoff needed a way to gatekeep. Enter the playoff. That's what it's all about, gatekeeping and greed. Isn't that great about college football? Gatekeeping and greed. Doesn't everybody love that? But yeah, crazy. And so one more thing I was talking about when the microphone was silent, I gave a short, brief college basketball model update, even though this is a college football video. I know a lot of people might be tuning in to hear me talk about that. I'll have an entire video tomorrow dedicated to college basketball and all of that, because I've made amazing progress on my college basketball model, and I got a big surprise coming. and I think you guys will like it. It's kind of like a reward for my loyal viewers and subscribers and everything. It's a reward. Uh, but it'll be great. Tune in tomorrow, see what it is, so I can show it off. But it's going to be awesome. What I'm going to do for my college basketball, I haven't actually done a dry run yet. I probably will tomorrow or Friday. But and I'm hoping on Saturday I can officially launch it. But what I have planned is, a lot of teams haven't played games yet, or only one game or two games. That's not enough. So in order for a game to be included in the daily betting rundown, each team will have had to have played at least 3 games. And so it's not going to be the entire slate of games, but enough. And the bet types will be spreads, money line, totals. No first half bets, no prop bets yet, no first half bets yet, no first half totals or anything like that yet. Maybe in the future, but as right now, it's going to be simple. Money line, spread, totals, and then DFS, which I haven't programmed in yet, but that won't take long. That'll be pretty easy. But it's going to be awesome. So yeah, stay tuned tomorrow for my college basketball model update progress video blowout. So that's pretty much all I was talking about while I was silent. And now I will look into the chat. That's the thing. Like, I didn't look into the chat until 19 minutes in, and then I saw all the people saying there's no sound. I was like, oh crap! Like, I need a producer. I'm not realistic yet. I'm in this Airbnb for about 10 more days, and then Christmas and my trip to Colorado, and after that I will move into a more permanent place where I could set up a studio and everything. I probably won't have a producer still, but it'll it'll be what it is. All right, so let me look at the chat. All right, yeah. All right, so so I do ask a question for those of you still tuned in that I did not lose due to mute gate. But what do you guys think of me doing these broadcasts in the afternoon? I had been doing them at night, but I could do them in the morning. I could do them in the afternoon. I could do them at night, right? It's I don't know. Because I could do them in the morning. I think doing it in the morning would be, I could do them whenever. Like, my plan ultimately when I have like a studio set up is to do like live broadcasts on like Saturday mornings and afternoons for college basketball, and then maybe during the week do them in the morning, maybe on a Friday, because I don't think anyone would watch on a Friday night. Saturday could be any day any time. Sunday maybe during the day. I don't know. I don't know what people think. I could do these broadcasts whenever, so anyway. Maybe get some feedback on the time of day. All right. College football should be 8 teams. Yeah, at least 8. I still an advocate for 16, but yeah, at least 8 with automatic bids. Yeah, did I watch? Am I a fan of Stanford? They remind me a lot of TCU. Try to get it done by defense and running the ball. That's the thing, though. Us and Stanford have pretty much had the same issues these days, and that's the offensive line. It's kind of hard to have a defense running the ball style when your offensive line is bad, and that's why we are both treading water right now. Did I watch BYU and Coastal Carolina? I did. I'm not surprised BYU lost. I didn't think they were that good of a team. Definitely not a playoff team. I don't even think they're a top 10 team. They just played a Sun Belt schedule. They're better than the teams they had played up to that point, but I'm not surprised they lost. Coastal Carolina, no one's talking about them, though. They have a better win than Cincinnati. Their win over BYU is better than anything Cincinnati has done. So the reason Cincinnati is still ranked higher is the benefit of the doubt that the AAC is better than the Sun Belt. It probably is, but with the lack of non-conference games, there's really no way to find out. But if you're just looking at who has the better win, Coastal Carolina does. And Coastal Carolina also beat UL Lafayette, who might be what's Cincinnati's best win? SMU? They got blown out by East Carolina. UCF, 3 losses. They have a chance to make a statement against Tulsa, who's decent. But what is Cincinnati's flagship win? I think Coastal Carolina has 2 wins that are better than what Cincinnati has. So why is Cincinnati still ranked ahead of Coastal Carolina? Because like I said, that would be an eye test reason. Cincinnati's there because benefit of the doubt. Eye test, not resume. Coastal Carolina, I think, has a better resume. I do. But yeah, I watched the BYU Coastal game. Coastal Carolina's coach is going to be a hot commodity. Does he go to? He's not going to go to South Carolina because they're going to hire that Beamer guy. But does he go to a place like Virginia Tech? Something like that. I would be very cautious. He did not build that program. Joe Moglia built Coastal Carolina, but he had to retire. So I'd be very cautious about hiring this guy who doesn't have a lot of experience at Coastal Carolina. Very cautious. Kind of like Nebraska hiring Scott Frost. He was there for, at UCF for 2 seasons? He didn't build the program. George O'Leary did. Yeah, you got to be very, like Missouri hiring Appalachian State coach from last year. He was there for 1 year. He inherited a very good Appalachian State roster, and a lot of people could say that they underachieved. They should have gone undefeated. And then Missouri hires him. What did he do? Nothing. He was a coordinator for NC State who went to Appalachian State, inherited a good program, probably underachieved, and then Missouri hires him. I would be cautious about a P5 program hiring Coastal Carolina's coach in the offseason. He has not proven he can build that program. He inherited it from Joe Moglia. Careful. Careful. Yeah, Joseph Hanwe. I don't think the Pac-12 has a chance. I don't. Oregon was their chance, and they've already lost twice. So now they have USC carrying the banner, but that's why you need non-conference games. Yeah. What time tomorrow? What time tomorrow for college basketball? I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I'd like to I wish I could do it in the morning, afternoon, night. That's a good one. Creighton and Iowa yesterday. Yeah. Did Creighton end up beating Kansas? I know Creighton probably covered, but did Creighton end up beating Kansas? I know Iowa was losing to North Carolina when I saw it, but I think Iowa ended up coming back. College basketball is not the same. I'm sorry. I'm going to have fun betting on it and everything, but you got to have the crowds. That's the best part about college basketball is the crowds. I've been to games at Kansas and Iowa State. Those are the 2 best home crowds I've been able to be a part of. And even TCU basketball, when the arena's full, like, I don't know if anybody knows this, but in the late 90s, TCU was coached by Billy Tubbs. And I was not a fan of the style. It was a very gimmicky style. It was the basically what Loyola Marymount and like all of them would run, like extremely fast tempo on offense, like shooting a 3-pointer very early in the shot clock, and then on defense, pressing and trying to go for steals, but if not, just giving up the easy basket. Basically, tons of possessions. So TCU basketball games, they would score like 140 points in some games. The downside of that style is that if you could play a team that could match your athleticism, you would probably lose. But anyway, TCU basketball in the late 90s had a pretty good team, 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, undefeated in the WAC, and it would get loud in there. I would go to those games, and it would get loud in there. So even TCU basketball, when they get the arena full and the fans get into it, can have a good home crowd. But without all these home crowds, it's not the same. And I know I've been saying that about football and baseball and everything, but college sports really need it. Like, what if the kick 6 for Auburn happened with no crowd? I'm trying to think of good college basketball moments that featured, a good home crowd. Does anyone remember that Butler versus Gonzaga game? I think it was in 2012 or 2013. But they played like a non-conference game in January, and it was awesome. Awesome crowd. And Butler won on a buzzer beater against Gonzaga. It was played at Hinkle Fieldhouse. College basketball crowds are awesome. Like, even teams like Utah State have awesome home basketball crowds. Did anybody watch the Big South champion or the Atlantic Sun championship game last year with Liberty beating whoever they beat in the who'd they beat? Was it I don't know who they beat in the Atlantic Sun championship game last year, but they had an awesome crowd for that. Winthrop, they played Hampton in the Big South championship game last year on their home floor. Awesome environment. Winthrop, guys are doing damage to themselves. Like, I know not all these games are being played in front of empty arena, but they might as well be. Like watching these preseason tournaments that were allowed to have fans in Florida, for example, it was a joke. Yep. Evening better on weekdays. Yeah, I know people work. I get that. I just thought I'd try it out. More money. Did I talk about why it was it when I was talking about the college football playoff and why it's at 4 teams, was that? And when I said it's that way for 2 reasons, greed and what was the other reason? Greed was the big one, yeah. And not having to share. Thoughts on Northwestern? Well, I don't think they were that good. Them losing to Michigan State did not surprise me. The Big Ten West just isn't that good, and when a team like Northwestern rises to the top, it's just an indictment of the league as a whole. They're not that good. What are my thoughts on them? They're a Pat Fitzgerald team. They're not gonna be great. They can have seasons where they overachieve and win 9 or 10 games every now and then, but they're a Pat Fitzgerald team. They're not going to be exciting. They're going to play pretty fundamentally sound, but they're just not going to have the horses. When they played in the Big Ten championship game however many years ago, that was a good overachieving season. But that's their ceiling, They can win the Big Ten West because it's so inconsistent. There's no Ohio State or Penn State over there. But their ceiling is probably losing to one of those Big Ten East teams in the championship game. Well, chess tournaments use an ELO system. So that's pretty much what the metrics are in college football. Your metrics are like an ELO system. Everyone's different. Everyone has their own way of computing power ratings for college football teams, but that's why the BCS is pretty good at what it did. It used like a conglomerate, although I think throwing out margin of victory is a very bad idea. For the, none of the computer metrics were allowed to use margin of victory as one of their metrics, so they're all pretty much the same variation of different minor changes of a ranking. But the metrics, if you're allowed to use all the college football metrics out there, and average them all together, you'd have the top 4 teams probably. Definitely the top 4 resumes, but the top 4 teams probably. But even then, that's not enough. There's not a big enough sample size. A 12-game schedule and a 3 or 4-game non-conference slate is not a big enough sample size to pick the 4 best teams out of 130. It's not. Who's coaching Michigan next year? Honestly, if I had to go put a bet on that, I would bet on Jim Harbaugh. I think he'll be back. Michigan fans may not like that, but I think he'll be back. They'll be able to use COVID as the excuse. If he's not back, though, who do I think it'll be? Well, I think it'll be Matt Campbell's job if he wants it. Will Matt Campbell leave Iowa State? I think he would for the right opportunity, and I do think Michigan's one of them. If not Matt Campbell, they would probably go after Luke Fickell at Cincinnati. But my problem with Luke Fickell is I think he's just another Mark D'Antonio. Nothing wrong with that, but his teams are going to have good defenses, but offense is always going to be a question mark. Is that what Michigan fans want? Do they want a question mark? Now, here's the deal. I've talked about this before, but I don't think I've talked about it on a live stream lately. In college football, you have 3 types of coaches. You got the mob bosses. These are rare. A mob boss is Nick Saban. A mob boss is someone who doesn't put up with any crap and is not controlled by the boosters. right? That's been the issue with programs like Texas and Michigan. It's the administration and the boosters and all that. You need somebody to be able to handle that. Urban Meyer was a good mob boss. A mob boss does not let the administration and boosters push them around. Now, in order for a mob boss type of coach to work, it has to be a blue blood type program that you don't have to put a lot of effort to recruit to. For example, Ohio State, not a hard place to get recruits. People are going to go play for Ohio State because it's Ohio State. Everyone's like, oh, look how great of a recruiter Ryan Day is. No. Has nothing to do with, has everything to do with there might be some recruiting involved, but Ryan Day would not be able to pull in the same recruiting class down the road at Cincinnati than he would at Ohio State. He wouldn't. So at a program like Ohio State, you need somebody who can keep the administration and boosters in check. I don't know if Ryan Day is that guy. I mean, so far he hasn't, they haven't had a bad season yet to where you're like, oh man, the administration and boosters are destroying this program like at a Michigan or Texas. But you need someone who can, not take any crap. Nick Saban's the best example. Urban Meyer was another good one. But mob bosses a mob boss type of coach isn't going to work at a directional school or a G5 school or a school with limited resources. It's not going to work at a place like Northwestern. Because in order for a mob boss to work, you got to have top recruiting classes. A lot of built-in resources and advantages. Because at that point, it's less about having to out-scheme your opponents and, win on the X's and O's, and more about keeping everything together, keeping everybody in check. You need an iron fist ruler to do that. So then, after the mob boss, you have your motivators. Motivators are what I also call useful idiots. The best example of motivators right now would be Dabo Swinney and Ed Orgeron. They're not X's and O's guys. They're not going to out-scheme you. They're not going to beat you on adjustments, and, they're going to delegate everything to their coordinators. The coordinators are going to do that. A motivator exists to just kind of be a figurehead almost. Kind of like, Ed Orgeron is not a good coach, and LSU fans are not happy with him right now. He won last year because he had good coordinators and generational talent at certain positions. His role is just to be there and motivate and recruit and be a lightning rod for everything else behind the scenes. Useful idiots. Delegate everything to the coordinators. A motivator is going to recruit. A motivator can recruit. And a motivator is also going to be... A motivator, like Dabo Swinney, for example, is also going to be what I call what's a good way to use it? There's no doubt that Clemson cheats. And so Dabo Swinney, I think a lot of what he does is an act. This is just his good old boy, Christian man, honorable. It's all an act to mask the fact that they cheat. They cheat. And I'm not saying that the mob bosses don't cheat either, but, like I said, iron fist rulers and everything, it's a little bit different than the motivators. They kind of exist to deflect attention away from the cheating. Gene Chizik, when Cam Newton and Auburn won the title, was a motivator. Motivators are kind of there to they're not babysitters. They're not iron fist rulers. Motivators will be pushed around by the boosters, but they're kind of like the useful idiots of the boosters and administration. And the problem with motivators is if your coordinators aren't doing their jobs, and if you're not, if you're having off the field issues and everything could be sunk. And we're seeing that with LSU this year. They didn't have the generational talent in the right positions this year. Their coordinators left. Now what, right? Everything falls apart. They don't have the mob boss in place to, make sure the next person up. That's the thing with a mob boss. Like in the mafia, it's like the next person up, right? And that's how Nick Saban runs Alabama. They're not gonna win the title every year. I mean, they lost 2 times last year, but they're able to, for the most part, keep things operating smoothly whenever there's changes, in the coordinators or whatever. Not the case with motivators. It's more of a house of cards. And motivators, like mob bosses, can only work at a place like an LSU or a Clemson, where you have a lot of built-in advantages and it's not very hard to recruit. It's not hard to recruit to LSU. There's a lot of in-state talent who are going to go to LSU because they're LSU. They grew up watching them. And they have no in-state competition for those recruits like a Clemson does, but South Carolina's kind of irrelevant right now. But those are the two types of head coaches I've talked about. And then you have your X's and O's guys. X's and O's guys can only work at schools with limited resources. Like my head coach, Gary Patterson, was an X's and O's guys. These are the guys who have disadvantages, whether it be recruiting or facilities or resources or whatever, whose only shot to be competitive is to out-scheme you, beat you at the X's and O's, get the most out of your talent, develop the players, all of that. Gary Patterson, my head coach, great example. I don't think X's and O's guys can work at a blue blood. Tom Herman was an X's and O's guy. Texas hired him. I don't think it can work because X's and O's guys do not stand a chance against the boosters and the administration and all the other distractions out there that you have to handle at a place like Texas. They don't. X's and O's guys are also kind of hard to respect from a recruiting standpoint. Like, they're Texas is going to get good recruits because they're Texas, but from a recruiting standpoint, X's and O's guys work best when it comes to getting those under-the-radar guys that they can develop and mold. They're not going to be as successful with the blue chippers, because here's the deal with blue chippers. I didn't really have a lot of experience with them, but I know that the very first thing that Coach Patterson would tell the new guys when they got to campus was, all right, this isn't high school anymore. You guys haven't accomplished anything. You're going to have to earn your way back up. I don't care who you are or what you did in high school, right? But there is a sense of entitlement. With the better recruit you get, the more sense of entitlement they might have. And so they might get onto campus and think they won't have to work, or they already have it made. I was good in high school. Why do I have to? Everyone in college was good in high school. But if you're like a McDonald's All-American and all that, you might think you might have it made. So an X's and O's guy has to be a good player developer, right? That's another thing about the mob bosses. They're able to keep the egos in check. Same with motivators. They're able to keep the egos in check. But X's and O's guys have a harder time doing that. But X's and O's guys won't work at a place like a Michigan or a Texas. You need a mob boss or a motivator. X's and O's guys can only really work at a place like a TCU. Because X's and O's guys cannot handle the prima donna top recruits. They cannot handle the boosters. They can't handle the administration. They can't handle the fan base. They can't handle the pressure. So the reason I got onto this subject was because we were talking about Michigan. I would say Jim Harbaugh could be a mob boss if he wanted to be, but I'd say he's turned into more of a motivator. But Matt Campbell, what does he fall under? He's an X's and O's guy. Can he be a mob boss needed at a place like Michigan? I don't know. That's the thing. You need someone who can handle the distractions, and I don't know if Matt Campbell can, but we'll see. Will he still be at Iowa State after this year? I don't know. Michigan's job is his if he wants it, but he'll have to turn into a mob boss type. I don't think he's a motivator. Definitely not. But he'd have to turn into a mob boss type to succeed at a place like Michigan. But that's kind of my thing about college coaching. And the thing with mob bosses is that there's only so many of them. And you kind of become one. You have to be, it's not like, I would say the only mob bosses right now would be Nick Saban. He'd probably be maybe Jimbo Fisher. But it's not like they're diamond. You kind of have to become one. Like, that's the thing with the mafia. Like, you get promoted to mob boss as an underboss or a capo regie or whatever. Then you have to become one. So can Matt Campbell, does he have what it takes to become an iron fist ruler type at a place like Michigan? Yep. Yeah, Joseph Hamwee at Oregon. I'm surprised they've lost twice. I'm surprised that the teams they've lost to. I could see them losing to a Washington or a USC, but they lost to Oregon State and Cal. Really? So it looks like all hype. So I was never a big believer in Mario Cristobal, though. He was okay at Florida International, but is he a good coach? I don't think so. I mean, I'm not saying he's a bad coach, but can he get them to the level they're under like Chip Kelly and everything? I don't think he's that kind of guy. I was not a big fan of them hiring him. He might be more of a Bill Stewart situation. So Bill Stewart was who West Virginia hired after Rich Rodriguez left. And they pretty much hired him because the players liked him and they won a bowl game with him. And, but was he the right fit? I don't think so, but they hired him anyway, and he didn't really pan out. I could see Mario Cristobal being the same way. Yeah, so Kansas won against Creighton last night. I haven't been impressed with Kansas. I mean, they played a D2 team earlier this week, and they didn't look that great. They only beat North Dakota State by 4. They were beaten pretty easily by Gonzaga. I know they beat Kentucky, but I think Kentucky is an NIT team this year. I do. But Kansas is definitely beatable this year, and, they're not going to rule the Big 12 like they have. They're beatable. The Big 12 is better. Outside of Kansas State, who they're losing to Fort Hays State last night at halftime. I don't know if they ended up winning that game or not, but Kansas State's bad, Iowa State's bad, but the rest of Big 12 is probably going to be pretty good. Yeah, Duke crowds are amazing. That's always been a bucket list item of mine to go to a Duke home game, but it's so hard to get tickets. They're so expensive. Still a bucket list item of mine, but yeah, I mean, say what you want about Duke. I know a lot of people like to hate them, but they've done a lot for college basketball. They've done a lot, and their crowds are amazing. They are. Like, they're playing Michigan State last week in the Big 12, or the championship classic or whatever, and they fell behind by 14 points in the second half, and I said, this game's over. If the Duke had their typical Duke crowd there, it wouldn't be over because the crowd would get them back in it, but pretty insurmountable when there's nobody there. I think there's one person in the stands, and that was Coach K's wife. She was in the stands. Indiana beating Kentucky at the buzzer was in 2011. I remember that, though. December 2011. Imagine that without a crowd. Imagine that without a crowd. That would suck, right? It wouldn't be memorable at all. Because there's been some pretty awesome buzzer beaters. I know, like, Xavier in 2008, I want to say they beat Villanova, maybe, on a buzzer beater at, like, some random Thanksgiving tournament, like the Cancun Challenge or Old Spice Classic, one of those. And there's nobody there, so it's just like, yeah. A lot of the memorable college basketball moments are because there's an atmosphere that makes it memorable. Even in the Ncaa tournament where it's neutral floor, like, there's still pretty good crowds at those games. And you remember Kentucky's run in 2014 in the Ncaa tournament as an 8 seed? All those games are very memorable, and they wouldn't have been as memorable with no crowd. Like, those crowds really got into those games. They beat Kansas, or who'd they beat in the first round? It was like some 9 seed, like Kansas State, I think. Yeah, they beat Kansas State in the first round. Second round, they beat 1 seed Wichita State. Then they beat Louisville, big rivalry game in the Sweet 16 and all these games except their first round game against Kansas State came down to the wire. And Kentucky won them. They beat Louisville. Then in the Elite 8, they beat Michigan. And then in the Final Four, they beat Wisconsin. And then they lost to UConn in a pretty close game in the title game. But all those games were awesome because they had a pretty good neutral site crowd. And my favorite thing about the crowds in the NCAA tournament, especially in the first round, is how they get behind the underdog. It's almost like a disadvantage for the higher seeds. Unless they're like Kansas playing in like Kansas City, for example, in the first round, the crowd might be pro Kansas. Like, there's some exceptions to be made where it might be close enough to the school to where it might not be a hostile crowd, but Virginia against UMBC in that game, they didn't have the crowd on their side. The crowd was going for UMBC. It was in Charlotte. And a lot of these upsets that happen in the NCAA tournament are because the crowd puts over the underdog team. Without that, that's why a lot of these upsets happen at night, because there's less energy during the day from the crowd than the night games in the NCAA tournament. And without that crowd energy to feed off of, a lot of these upsets don't happen. George Mason does not make their Final Four run without a crowd in 2011, because that Elite Eight game where they beat UConn was played in Washington, D.C., which is where George Mason is. That would not have happened if it was not, the crowd would have been behind George Mason over UConn anywhere except maybe in Hartford, Connecticut. But, these crowds really do help the underdogs in the NCAA tournament. More so in the earlier rounds, but they get behind the Cinderella teams. They do. I'm trying to think of upsets that wouldn't have happened without a crowd. What are some good, notable NCAA tournament upsets that happened because the crowd just willed it? Like Norfolk State against Missouri in 2012 would not have happened without the crowd. You know why? Because Kansas was playing in a game later that day, and so there's a ton of Kansas fans there that were pulling for Norfolk State, not just because they were the underdog, but because they were playing in Missouri. That game was played in Omaha. And, when Mercer beat Duke in 2014, that game was played in, I want to say it was played in Greensboro, but yeah, that crowd willed that upset. So I hope that if they play the NCAA tournament in a bubble, that they play it in Florida so we can have fans. Because I said all wrong. This is still my prediction. The first sporting event we're going to get with a full crowd is going to be WrestleMania. It's going to be in Florida, probably Tampa, and then we're going to have a full crowd. It's going to be outside Raymond James Stadium. Once that domino falls, I think other organizations or states will be more comfortable having full crowds. There's a wild card in all this, and that's a potential Joe Biden administration that might put the clamps on that from a federal level. Although I could see Ron DeSantis in Florida thumbing his nose at that and saying no. But that's my prediction. So I really hope if we have an NCAA tournament, it's played in Florida, and we can have fans. I agree. Gozar. I don't think Michigan's going to get rid of Harbaugh. That's how I think. I don't think Penn State will get rid of James Franklin either. Now, I don't think, James Franklin is who he is. Is he the guy who can take Penn State to the promised land? He won a Big Ten title. But I think they have bigger aspirations than that. Can they get him back in the national title scene? Is James Franklin the guy? I don't know. I would say James Franklin can be a mob boss if he wants to be, but he's more of a motivator these days. He's not an X's and O's guy. Coxavelli, the thing with the road trip vlogs is I have 2 more videos to do. And yeah, I've just been so busy with my college basketball stuff, as well as my day job and everything, that I just haven't had time. Once I get the college basketball model up and running and, am able to establish a day-to-day routine with that, I'll get back to finishing those final 2. Here's the deal, though, with the road trip vlogs, is that my air conditioner going out really kind of killed the momentum of the trip. And it got to the point where I just didn't want to be in my car, especially I drove through the South. Because my last 2 destinations were Atlanta, Georgia, and Baton Rouge, and it was just miserably hot being in my car. And combine that with COVID, not a lot of interesting thing happened on those last 2 days, so I'll still do them eventually. But gosh, the AC being out just made me want to not be in my car at all. So they might not be the most exciting videos, but I'll do them. Any NFL versus college coaches? Yeah, so Damon Forbes, he just came up with a good thing to talk about. There's a difference between NFL and college coaches. A lot of people think, oh, he coached in the NFL, he'll be good in college. That's not how it works. They're two completely different games. All the NFL guys are pretty much X's and O's guys. Some might be more babysitters than X's and O's guys, but they don't have to deal with recruiting. They have to deal with egos a little bit more, but they don't have to recruit. They don't have to deal with boosters or administrations. So they're all kind of like hybrid mob boss X's and O's guys. You're not going to be an NFL coach if you can't scheme. You might be able to hire good coordinators to delegate it to, but you got to be a coach who can coach on the fly in the NFL. You don't have to be that in college. In college, especially at the bigger name schools, you just need to be able to recruit and be a good motivator and keep all the egos in check. You don't need to scheme. But here's the deal with NFL versus college. They practice different. Practices in the NFL are no contact. They're helmets only and then shirts and shorts. No contact. You just kind of do a lot of walkthroughs. Mostly the ones get all the reps. The backups really don't get a lot of reps in NFL practices. It's not like college where you have different huddles and they each get equal amount of reps. No, it's mainly the ones, the starters, and not a lot of contact. So the practices are, run to minimize injury and everything. And, it's just all the contact is pretty much done in training camp and the preseason games. So why do I bring that up? Because there have been college coaches that have tried to run their programs like that. Coach Patterson, when I was at TCU, he used to criticize June Jones over at SMU because June Jones was an NFL coach who ran his college program like an NFL team, and that's how they practiced. They were very soft because they did not have contact practices. He ran his SMU team and probably Hawaii team like he ran his San Diego Chargers team. And that's why they're very soft. And so that's kind of the risky run with NFL coaches going to coach college is they might run their practices that way. I think in college, you can't run a college team like an NFL team. You can't. You got to have contact practices. You got to let your 2s and 3s get an equal number of reps. And you have to, you got to do things different. You got to develop your guys more. NFL guys are already developed. So that's the difference. It's probably, and same thing with a college coach going to the NFL. Notice the guys who make the jump to the NFL are not your Dabo Swinneys or Ed Orgerons, the motivators who can't coach their way out of a paper bag, because they would flop. The NFL guys who get hired are the X's and O's guys. Cliff Kingsbury, Matt Rule. Now, it's one thing, it's probably too early to say whether or not those guys have succeeded or failed, but they're not going to hire a motivator in the NFL. You have to be a good X's and O's guys to get an NFL job. And it's still a different game, though. What your X's and O's at the college level might be different, might work in college, but might not work in the NFL. Or on the case of Cliff Kingsbury, his X's and O's, they did work at Texas Tech because he was an offensive guy only. They did work at Texas Tech, but he doesn't have to worry about defense in the NFL. I mean, he still has to worry about it to a degree, but you can hire a good defensive coordinator. You're going to have good defensive players. So Cliff Kingsbury, is succeeding more in the NFL because he didn't have to worry about recruiting or defense. Getting guys to go out to Lubbock. So, yeah, it's two different games. So you need two different types of coaches to succeed. K-State lost to Fort Hays State last night? Wow, God, Bruce Weber. I mean, they won the Big 12 2 years ago. But that program is just a mess, a total mess. I think Bruce Weber, his time has come. I really do. No offense to him. I think he's a great guy, but I think they need somebody else at K-State now. You can't lose to Fort Hays State. You can't. That's not even a Division I team. All right, any sites I recommend for college basketball box score data. So what I'm doing, do it now because I fear there will be a day where this can no longer be done. I'm scraping it directly from the Ncaa.com or org website. They still have their HTML box scores stat site up that you could scrape from. When that goes away, you're going to have to learn how to scrape JavaScript from Ncaa, or I'm going to drop sports reference here, okay? You can get box score data from sports reference. You can scrape it. But they could block your IP, and they have anti-scraping measures in place. I'm not saying you can't do it, though. But that's probably the second best option. That would probably be a backup option for me if the Ncaa doesn't have their HTML pages anymore. But that's where I'm getting the stuff from my Monte Carlo. Ncaa. It's either .com or .org. One of them directs to a JavaScript site. The other one directs to HTML. But it's there. Coach K doesn't want to play during COVID. Is that what you were talking about, Damon Forbes and Alex A? Coach K don't want to play during COVID? I could, I'm going to say what I said all along. The level of risk for college players is very low. We have not had one COVID hospitalization from a football player yet. As far as I'm concerned, we haven't had one from a basketball player yet. They might get it. They might be sick for a day or two, but it's no different than the flu or swine flu. Players get the flu all the time and still play, or at least travel with the team. Just it's all about the level of risk that, college basketball players have no risk. So I could see why Coach K might have an issue as far as just there's no atmosphere and it just feels like an hollow, empty product, and I agree. But the season hasn't been canceled, so you got to do your job. Yeah, Korean baseball, I never even bothered. Yep. Hockey will be the first to have fans back. There's no way Justin in Canada is going, which is what I call their prime minister, Justin in Canada. Justin Trudeau. There's no way Justin in Canada is going to do it first. The only way he would do that would be for like a propaganda reason. He was like, look at how great Canada is compared to the United States. We're so great at handling the virus. We have fans back now, and the U.S. doesn't. Canada's better. Maybe for like a propaganda push. But apart from that, I don't see him bringing back fans before the U.S. does. The outdoor games for California hockey teams? I don't know. I don't think it gets cold enough there. I mean, they had the Winter Classic last year for the NFL or NHL here in Dallas. They did. But it still gets decently cold here in the wintertime. I mean, it's not like it's 70 degrees or even 60. That just seems like it'd be more effort than it's worth for the California-based hockey teams to do outdoor games. Selenium for NBA box scores. What's Selenium, if you don't mind me? I'm gonna Google it, but Selenium for NBA box scores. So is it like a Python package, I'm guessing? That's what it looks like just from my Google results. But yeah, that's the thing. It's easier to get box score data and all that stuff from for pro sports. And I could, like the framework that I have in place for my college basketball model, I could easily use it for NBA as well. I would just have to collect the stats and put it in the right frames. But the Monte Carlo simulation itself, I wouldn't have to change anything. I could do it for NBA as well, but that's the thing. You don't want to overextend yourself with models. Day-to-day maintenance and all that takes time. And it's not just about in season. You have to still do stuff in the off season to get things ready. Generate preseason ratings and all that stuff if you want to. But It's a bad idea to have too many models at once. I think 3 is a good number. That way you're not overwhelmed and overextending yourself. But I could replicate it for the NBA if I really wanted to. Bad Habits 21900. Are you talking about me when it comes to not following COVID-19 guidelines? I mean, I do. I mean, if a store says you have to wear a mask to get in, I'll do it. It's their business. It's their right to just decide. But what else am I not following? I mean, I'm in Texas right now, so I mean, it's a state that's probably on the more lax side when it comes to COVID and all that. So what exactly am I not following? Yeah, maintaining an outdoor hockey rink in California just sounds ridiculously expensive. And if they're not going to have fans, how are they going to justify the expense? I could see like the California team sharing a single ice rink, but hockey TV deals aren't going to pay the bills. Do I plan on doing a Monte Carlo video? Yeah, tomorrow. I'm doing a whole college basketball model video tomorrow. I need to work on the daily fantasy integration, but yeah, I'll do a video tomorrow about everything and show off what I have planned for everybody. I have a surprise, and I think it'll be fun. I do have a surprise. The surprise is pretty much programmed at this point, so it's ready. I just want to show it off on a college basketball video. All right, guys. Let's see, 3:30 almost. When did I start? 2, and then I had to start over again. How long have I been going? An hour, 4 minutes. Yeah, I think that should be enough for now. So I'm gonna call it a day. I'll be back tomorrow with my college basketball video. It's gonna be awesome. I can't wait to show it off. I created a new feature that I think everybody will appreciate. So I'll show that off tomorrow. All right, guys. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I apologize for the sound issues for the first